So excited to introduce our first speaker. She is our friend and partner at Climate and Energy Project, Sarah. Sarah, the floor is yours. Let me just, Sarah.
Hi there. Thanks so much, Ren. It's good to see you. And it's so exciting to see everyone here on the line today. As Ren mentioned, my name is Sarah Dehart-Faltico, and I am a program director at Climate and Energy Project. Ren, do you mind if I just screen share a couple of slides real quick?
Yeah, go for it. You should be able to. You're now a co-host, but if not, let me know.
Okay, let me pull that up. Just a second, everyone. So you're going to see all of yourselves for just a second. And then go here. All right, so the Climate and Energy Project, for those of you that aren't familiar, since there are some people from all over the country, thank you. We are a 501c3 that builds resilience in Kansas through equitable clean energy solutions and climate action. You know, the purpose of what we do and how we do it is in four main ways. We connect people, organizations, and ideas. We present science-based facts. We facilitate critical thinking and community engagement. And we co-create equitable and productive solutions. And the way that we do this work, the programming that we do, can be put into four main buckets: our climate resilience work, clean energy work, policy, and civic participation. And in terms of the climate resilience, it's a lot of adaptation work. We talk a lot about the public health impacts of climate change with a program called the Climate and Health Declaration. We do energy justice work in this field, in this arena. We have some collaborative partnerships across the state. Our wealth partnership, which is an acronym for water, energy, air, land, transportation, and health. And we also have some regional partnerships. And then we do specific organizing within specific communities, such as our Latinx outreach or organizing that we've done in specific zip codes around some energy justice issues. We also do clean energy work around wind and solar. Our solar work has been everything from residential solar all the way up to utility scale. Our energy efficiency work also falls in this bucket under clean energy. And then we have a coalition of clean energy business members called the Clean Energy Business Council, and they do a lot of work at the State House during the legislative session. Our policy work, like I mentioned, is a lot of it is done with the Clean Energy Business Council, but we also intervene with our Kansas Corporation Commission, which is our state's version of a Public Utilities Commission. And we are in the middle of an intervention on an energy efficiency docket with our state's largest investor-owned utility, Evergy, right now. But we also do work at the local and state level on policy, and then we track federal policy in partnership with some of our national partners. And then civic participation is where we are today. And I lead up a lot of that effort with our integrated voter engagement work. So the face of our civic participation is called the Kansas Climate Corps, and it stands for Community Organizing for Resilience and Equity. And essentially, it's just increasing the voter, like we aim to increase voter awareness and engagement on the links between health, climate resilience, equity, and energy. And we look at it as a systems-based approach to civic engagement. And so you can picture, you see this on the screen right now, kind of a wheel, and we call this the integrated voter engagement wheel. And essentially the hub of the wheel is the idea of helping our communities build long-term power so that we have long-term power and climate action across the state of Kansas. And each spoke on the wheel is a different strategy that we can work on. And we focus more on some than on others. In terms of organizing and mobilizing communities, I talked a little bit about that with the Climate and Health Declaration and our Kansas Environmental Youth, or KEY network. We also educate and engage the electorate in just about everything that we do. We're trying to make sure that our people in the state of Kansas are very aware of what's going on and ways that they can engage. We have a program called Kansas Environmental Leadership, where we are aiming to develop strong leaders, and that's from providing general leadership training all the way up to holding workshops and trainings on how to run for office. And then, you know, at the end of the day, we want to hold our electeds accountable and achieve policy impact. We are a small but mighty organization. We do a lot with a very small staff, of 6 people at this point. And, I would be remiss to say that we definitely don't do that alone. One of the ways that we get so much work done is by working in deep collaborative partnerships. And I could spend 15 minutes just talking about all of the different partnerships, just listing them out. But in terms of the work that we do around our civic engagement, some of our main partnerships are up here on the screen. And we really, really work in partnership with those that you see on the screen: the Voter Network, ACLU, Loud Light, and of course, Environmental Voter Project. For this, where we protect the vote, we're doing a partnership with the ACLU of Kansas and Loud Light on election protection training, so that some of our core members or leaders can be election observers and poll observers during the primaries and then during the general election. And then we're also working to organize and mobilize the communities and get out the vote with a relational organizing project with the Voter Network, where we are having folks talk to their friends and family and help support them in voting. And then, as you all well know, the work of Environmental Voter Project and getting out the vote by turning non-voting environmentalists into consistent voters with their amazing project and phone banking. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it back to them. But really quickly, we all know, that's why we're here, that climate action is critical. We're in the middle of a nasty heat wave here in the Midwest. We are at the first of, I think, 7 days where it's going to be over 100, but our heat indices have been in the hundreds for the last 2 weeks. President Biden is reportedly about to, potentially as early as tomorrow, potentially declare a climate emergency. And we're seeing climate impacts across the board, be they wildfires, be they droughts, be they then floods, and the impacts that has, not just on our lived environment, but on our lived experiences, and especially how that impacts disadvantaged and marginalized communities more so than others, is one of the reasons why we are all doing this work. So I thank you so much for being here and for taking action. I really do appreciate it. And without further ado, I will turn it back over to Ren. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Now I'll be passing the floor to our awesome executive director, Nathaniel Sinnett. Nathaniel will go over the data on low propensity environmental voters in Kansas. Nathaniel, the floor is yours. Let me just square away a few items on my end.
Great.
All right.
Thank you, Ren, and thank you, Sarah. And I know Dorothy is here from the Climate and Energy Project as well. We at the Environmental Voter Project just love partnering with the Climate and Energy Project. And for all of you who are here today, whether you live in Kansas or elsewhere, I see that we have people literally in all 4 corners: Alaska, Vermont, Florida, and Arizona. Please check out the Climate and Energy Project. They do extraordinarily important work. They do it well, and they do it in a state where their work is so incredibly important and needed. So please, please check them out. All right, thank you all for being here. As you know, this is a special briefing and phone bank. And so we want to get to the phone bank. And so what I'm going to do in the briefing portion of this is, let me first share my screen, only give the briefest of introductions to the Environmental Voter Project. So this session today is not learn about EVP. It is learn about the data that we're seeing in Kansas so you can go and make some new environmental voters. But I will just very briefly start with an introduction, then get into this briefing. Then we're going to have a very quick Q&A session. Then people who are already trained to call and have called with us before can go ahead and get started. We'll give you the credentials. But for people who haven't called with us before, there will be an online training, and then you can get started. And then at the very end, Ren will report back to everybody on how we did. So you get immediate feedback and immediate data. The Environmental Voter Project, for those of you who don't know, is a nonpartisan nonprofit that just does 2 things. 1, we use data analytics to identify environmentalists who don't vote. And then 2, we leverage behavioral science to canvass, call, text, send digital ads and direct mail to them to turn them into better voters. That's it. We find environmentalists who don't vote, and then we turn them into better voters. We are simply focused on changing behavior. We don't focus on changing people's minds to try to get them to care more about climate and the environment. And in Kansas in particular, where we expanded last year, we have been getting amazing results. We submit our work to what's called randomized control trials. And very briefly, what that allows us to do is isolate the impact that our campaigns are having on turnout while controlling for all outside variables like other campaigns or the weather or this, that. And as you'll see, what we saw in Kansas last year in local elections in Overland Park and Lawrence and Kansas City, we were able to increase turnout by as much as 4 percentage points over our control group. These are big numbers in the political game. Big, big numbers. And so the reason I bring this up to you is, one, to yet again stress, even for people who have been part of EVP's work for a while, we know that these messages we're asking you to convey to voters work. We test all of this stuff and we know this stuff works. But two, to also stress to you, we have a lot of data that shows, at least last year, this stuff happened to work better in Kansas than pretty much anywhere else. I'm not going to claim I know why, I don't. But this can be extraordinarily impactful. All right, that's enough for EVP. Let's do a deep dive into voter file information. All right, so as we look at Kansas in 2022, we have identified 59,722 targets. So what do I mean by that? These are people who are already registered to vote. Our predictive models show that these people have a greater than 85% likelihood of not just caring about climate and the environment, but quite literally listing it as their #1 priority over all other issues. So these are super environmentalists who are already registered to vote, yet they've never cast a ballot in a midterm election before, or a local election, a lower turnout election. And that is the number we get after already setting aside our control group. So we have these 60,000 already identified targets who we know don't need their minds changed. They don't need to be convinced to care about climate or the environment. We just need to get their rear ends out the door on election day. These are targets for our behavioral interventions. All right, what does 59,722 mean in a state like Kansas? Well, last time there was a midterm in Kansas, 1,055,000 ballots were cast. And the margin of victory for the gubernatorial election that year was 53,000 votes. So 59,722 ain't nothing. That's a big, potentially impactful population of voters who, again, we know we don't need to waste our time on the expensive, messy stuff of politics with these people. We don't need to change their opinions. We just need to nudge them out the door and change their behavior. All right, what's coming up on the ballot? Well, there is a US Senate race. Currently, the Cook Political Report does not classify that as terribly competitive. Obviously, things can change. But the gubernatorial election is extraordinarily competitive. It's currently listed as one of 4 toss-up gubernatorial elections in the entire United States. So 4 toss-ups. If you got the 4 most currently competitive gubernatorial elections, one of them would be Kansas. And that's Democratic Laura Kelly running for re-election. And again, last time, 4 years ago, she won by 53,000 votes. There are 4 US House seats in Kansas. And in the next slide, we're going to go into the lay of the land on the congressional map. But one of those is also so competitive that it is considered a toss-up. So that's what we're seeing ahead for November 8th. Even before then, the reason we're making calls today is there's an election coming up in just a few days. On August 2nd is the statewide primary. In addition to it being a primary election, it is also a statewide ballot question. Kansas courts have interpreted the state constitution of Kansas as granting a constitutional right to an abortion for Kansans. There is a ballot question that would amend the state constitution to repeal that right, to overturn that right. That is being voted on August 2nd, this upcoming primary. So not only are primaries important, as all of you know who have been involved in EVP before, because they're a really easy way to change people's voting habits, but this is also a really, really high salience election. All right, that's what the electoral context looks like. Let's dive into a little bit of who these 59,722 targets of ours are. You'll see at that chart at the bottom, we have one row that says EVP targets. That's those 59,000. And then the bottom row, all registered voters, that is all registered voters in Kansas. Now, just to clarify, the EVP targets, those are also registered voters. Remember, we're contacting people who are already registered. They just don't bother to show up. But to provide some context, I wanted to show you what the demographic breakdowns were of all registered voters. First thing that pops out, this probably doesn't surprise you, our target population of super environmentalists is overwhelmingly young. Now, to provide some non-Kansas context for this, you know, we always have target populations that are overwhelmingly young, but usually not this disproportionately young. I mean, we're looking at 78% of our target population being 18 to 34. Usually it's more in the 68 to 72% range. And when you compare that to the fact that Kansas is a disproportionately old state, I mean, you'll see only 27% of registered voters are 18 to 34, but 78% of our targets are 18 to 34. Another thing that we see here is 50 to 64-year-olds. This doesn't perfectly align with Gen X. Gen X is more like 42 to 57, but this is something that we are now seeing in all of our states. Not only are we seeing it, but Pew Research is seeing it, Yale Program on Climate Change Communications is seeing it, New York Times Siena polling is seeing it. This age group, 50 to 64, and even a little bit younger than that, you know, sort of true Gen Xers, they are the least likely to care deeply about climate and the environment. It's no longer as simple as saying, the older you get, the less likely you are to care about climate and the environment. We're not seeing that anymore. If anything, we're seeing something that is more akin to like a sine wave with a few humps in it. And these, especially 45 to 64-year-olds, there are very, very few of them in our target populations. All right, sex. Voter file data delineates sex, not gender, because of just the way data is collected by most states and municipalities and counties. And you'll see, we see a huge male-female split. That also is not unusual. I'll use the term gender gap, but please understand this data is different from gender. This is sex data, but we consistently see a pretty big gender gap in our target audience. Even if you remove vote propensity as a factor, it's as simple as people who care deeply about climate and the environment are much more likely to be women than men. And then finally, you'll see Kansas is a very, very white state. Almost 90% of registered voters are white. Again, we're using the ethnic and demographic nomenclature that's found in the voter file. Our target population is disproportionately Hispanic and AAPI. All right. This is the breakdown by congressional district. What the partisan lean column means is Congressional District 1, on average, votes 34 points more Republican than the average congressional district in the United States. So you'll see CD 1, 2, and 4 are really, really red, dark, dark, dark red. But Congressional District 3 is R+3. That means it only leans 3 points more Republican than the average congressional district. That is represented by Sharice Davids, an incumbent Democrat. And as you'll see, when we break down where our EVP targets are in each of these congressional districts, holy moly, is the overwhelming plurality of them in Congressional District 3. So the one pretty close congressional district also happens to be where we have a disproportionately large number of our targets. When we look at our almost 60,000 targets in Kansas, over 75% of them are people for whom we have phone numbers. This is also a very, very large number. We don't see this in voter files in a lot of other states, but this is a great opportunity. Is calling the only way to turn non-voters into voters? No, of course not. We send mail, we send digital ads, we knock on doors, but it is a good way, and we have the data to prove it from our randomized control trials. And the fact that we can call 45,000 of these targets is, again, an indication of what a big opportunity this is, not only for climate volunteers, but for the broader climate movement. And then this is what the calendar looks like coming up. So early voting started in some counties in Kansas, not all of them, but some counties back on July 13th. By the 26th, it becomes available in all counties. We obviously have a phone bank following this presentation and Q&A today. If you go to our website under the Get Involved tab, you can sign up for a phone bank that we're holding on the 25th. We're holding another phone bank on the 28th. And we are holding a phone bank on Election Day, August 2nd. And then, with all apologies due to the great people of Kansas, the very next day after August 2nd, we're going to get right back to work talking to them. And we are going to have daily canvassing available. And then when early voting starts, we will be calling people as well. And once you have been trained, you can get on a list where we email you the credentials to log in and call whenever you'd like, even if you don't want to attend one of these scheduled phone banks. With that, I think we are ready for the Q&A. And so we're not going to have a very long Q&A session because we do want to get you on the phones to start turning non-voters into voters, but we do have time for a few questions. So I'll turn it back over to you, Ren.
Thank you, Nathaniel. We have one from Gus. Was the last governor race in Kansas considered a toss-up, or is it expected to be even closer this time?
It was not considered a toss-up until the very end of the election back in 2018. Does that sound right, Sarah? I see you kind of nodding your head. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very, very close race. And Nathaniel was right. It was right up to the very end. But I don't necessarily, like you said, know if it was actually considered a toss-up because that didn't happen until the very end.
Yeah. And one thing we need to contend with here is, polling data has had a lot of imperfections, as we've come to realize over the last 4 or 5 years. But it has been particularly problematic in the Plains and Midwestern states because of this big problem that surveyors are having, which is called a non-response bias, which is that there are certain demographics. And in this case, in the Plains states and the Midwestern states, we're talking about non-college educated white people. That demographic is much less likely to answer surveys in Plains and Midwestern states. At least that was the case up until 2020. Whether that's still the case, we don't know. But what that means is, at least when I look at polling data heading into the midterms, I just automatically, my default setting is I'm a little bit more skeptical about polling data in the Plains and Midwestern states, just because any professional pollster will tell you they're kind of scared to poll there. They're kind of scared to poll Iowa and Kansas and Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio and Pennsylvania and places like that. So the short answer to that question is It was close 4 years ago. It's really close now. How close? Nobody really knows. But if you ask any of these like professional prognosticators, it is at the top of their list of really competitive elections.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathaniel. I'm gonna send you two questions, but I will frame them in one. They're the same category. What does non-callable means? And then the second question is that, has EVP ever considered mass texting? Is there an advantage to calling?
Got it. Two great questions. So non-callable simply means we don't have a phone number for them. So there are a few ways to get phone numbers. One is that when people registered to vote, they included their phone number along with their registration. And two is if they have opted in to including their phone number with some political campaign, and then that number gets added to voter files and those people don't opt out. And so when we say there are uncallable numbers, they're just people we don't have phone numbers for. As far as mass texting, the Environmental Voter Project used to have volunteers text voters. Last fall, the mobile phone carriers, so this isn't a law, but the mobile phone carriers themselves enacted a new set of rules that said you cannot text people unless they have previously opted into receiving those texts. And that's obviously a problem when you are texting strangers on voter files. Now, as many of you might be wondering, there are still campaigns and still nonprofits that do text people off of voter files. So I'm not saying that this new rule has stopped everybody from doing it. It has stopped the Environmental Voter Project from doing it though, and here's why. One, the mobile phone carriers have not levied many fines yet, but they keep on telling us that they will levy fines for texting people who have not opted in. And we don't think that's a very good use of our donors' money to pay fines that we have a pretty good idea are coming, especially when we have other great ways to turn non-voters into voters, like calling and canvassing and mail and digital ads. The second reason we're not doing it is what we know is already happening, is that many of those texts are not actually getting through to voters. They're being blocked by the mobile phone carriers. And there, we don't think that's a good use of our volunteers' time. If we ask you to do something and tell you that we think it's going to be impactful, we don't want half of your text to not go through to those voters. So I can't claim that it is a bad idea that other groups or campaigns are texting voters. This is a very important moment in time and anything helps. And I think it's probably good that many of them are still texting. But this is why we at EVP are not texting, because we always want to be able to look our donors in the face and let them know that their money is actually having an impact. We want to always be able to look our volunteers in the face and let them know that their time is actually having an impact. But this is something that we are absolutely tracking on a weekly basis. And as soon as we think we can do this without incurring fines and without wasting volunteer time, we will immediately start texting again.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathaniel. Okay, I'm going to be giving you the last question for today's event, and it's coming from Bet. Could the preponderance, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, of younger voters in the sample be partly accounted for by the older environmentalists already being voters?
So it's a great question, Bet. Yes. So let me put this another way. The Environmental Voter Project obviously only targets environmentalists who are unlikely to vote. And if we've determined that you're unlikely to vote, it's because looking at your public voting records, we've seen that you haven't cast ballots in previous elections. And when we talk about these demographic trends that we see in our target population, so disproportionately young, disproportionately people of color, another thing I didn't mention is disproportionately lower income people. As Bet alluded to in her question, some of the reason we see those demographic trends is likely just because young people, people of color, and lower income people vote less often. It's just a pure sort of demographic correlation there. And so, yes, that's absolutely part of what's going on, Bet, but it's only part. And I know that because even when we look just within a single demographic group, so let's take young people, the ones who care deeply about climate and the environment still vote less often than other young people. Or if we just look at Latinx voters, the ones that care deeply about climate and the environment vote less often than other Latinx voters. So you're absolutely right that demographics are part of what is driving this low turnout among environmentalists, but it's not the only thing that's driving it. Most importantly, though, even though it's still kind of a black box why all these environmentalists aren't voting, we do know how to get them to vote. And ultimately, that's much more important than figuring out why they're not voting. We have these randomized control trials that prove if you deliver these messages that we're giving to you, you are going to turn non-voters into voters. You're going to do it for the August 2nd primary, and you're going to do it for the November 8th general election. And so I'll hand it over to Ren, but I just want to close by saying there are 84 people on the line right now. I can guarantee you there has not been a phone bank to Kansas voters anywhere close to this large in the year 2022, maybe even the year 2021 too. And so the next hour and 25 minutes has the opportunity to be enormously impactful. And so thank you for joining us here. Please do remember to check out the fine work that Climate and Energy Project is doing if they are new to you. And thank you to Sarah and to Dorothy and to Ren and to all of you for being here and being a part of our work.